Hey guys, today we are stepping into ancient Athens, where the naked body was not just seen, but celebrated as a symbol of truth, courage, and communal belonging. Through the eyes of Diodorus, discover how nudity shaped philosophy, art, and daily life, revealing the soul of a civilization unafraid to be fully seen. If you enjoy our content, consider liking the video and subscribing. Also comment where you are listening in from. Now let us begin. The sun had already begun its slow climb across the Athenian sky, drenching the marble columns and dusty streets in golden light. Each morning in the city was like the first stroke on a blank canvas, but this one shimmered with particular warmth. The agora was alive with motion. Vendors opened their stalls to reveal fresh figs, olives, and fish, still smelling of the sea, while slaves swept stone paths clean with careful diligence. The sounds of the city blended together, sharp, rhythmic hammering from the blacksmith's forge, the sharp clop of sandals against pavement, the shrill calls of merchants hawking their goods. Among these morning rituals, another took place that was so ordinary to the Athenians that none looked twice. Young men walked, not in tunics or cloaks, but fully bare beneath the sun. They moved through the streets without embarrassment or hesitation, their skin darkened by sun and work, their bodies toned by years of physical labor and training. No one shouted in protest. No cloaks were thrown across shoulders to shield shame. This was not exhibitionism. It was instead a profound expression of identity, of a cultural philosophy that placed the human body in its natural form at the center of life. To outsiders, it was jarring. A traveler from Persia, newly arrived and draped in layers of dyed linen, stepped aside in astonishment as a group of naked athletes jogged past him in unison, muscles rippling, dust clinging to their calves. "Are they slaves?" the Persian asked his host, unable to hide his confusion. His Athenian guide, an older man named Theramenes, laughed heartily. "Slaves? No, my friend. Those are free men, citizens, perhaps even aristocrats. They train their bodies in the gymnasium. They show themselves because they have nothing to hide." The Persian blinked, unsure whether to admire or scorn what he had just witnessed. That same morning, a boy named Diodorus stood just outside the palestra, the wrestling ground of the gymnasium. 16 years of life weighed heavily on his narrow shoulders. His skin was pale compared to the others who walked past him. He wore a short chiton, clutching the edges nervously. His father had insisted he come here, just as every man in their family had before, but no amount of stern paternal instruction could prepare him for what he now saw. A courtyard filled with bodies in motion, running, leaping, grappling, shouting, all entirely nude. He felt the eyes of others glance toward him, then pass by. No one stared long. To them, he was just another new recruit. But inside, Diodorus burned with anxiety. His mind raced with thoughts. What if he was too skinny? What if others laughed? What if his body, his plain, untrained body, betrayed his inexperience? First day, came a voice from behind him. Diodorus turned to see a man standing beside him. He was older, perhaps in his late 40s, with a powerful chest and arms like chiseled stone. His beard was flecked with gray, and his posture was upright like a soldier's. He wore no tunic, only sandals and a thin leather strap around his waist that held a flask. Yes, Diodorus stammered. The man extended a hand. "I am Menon, trainer here for 20 years. You must be Diodorus, son of Philostratos. Your father was a lion in the ring. I expect no less from you." Diodorus's throat tightened. "I'm not sure I'm ready." "Ready?" Menon said, raising an eyebrow. "You were born ready. You arrived in this world naked. That was the gods' choice. And so shall you meet them again, free of shame." He gestured toward the changing area, which was little more than a shaded colonnade where boys and men disrobed and stored their sandals and garments. Go, leave your doubts with your tunic. With trembling fingers, Diodoros walked beneath the shade and unfastened his belt. The chiton slid off his body, pooling at his feet. He stepped out from the colonnade and into the sunlight, bare to the world, his heart pounding, skin cold despite the warmth in the air. For a moment, he felt raw, like a crab without its shell. But then Menon clapped a hand on his back. Good. Now, into the ring. The training began with simple drills. Run the perimeter, lift weights, stretch the arms, test the legs. Diodoros followed clumsily at first, his limbs still stiff from nerves. But as his body moved, something began to shift. The breeze brushing against his chest, the sweat collecting on his brow, the sand under his feet. It all felt honest. There was no clothing to hide behind, no fabric to twist in worry, just skin, sun, and exertion. He watched others wrestle in the central arena. The matches were intense but respectful. Two men locked together in sand-covered embrace, their muscles straining, bodies twisting. There was elegance in their struggle, like the brushstrokes of a painter. Every movement exposed strength, weakness, strategy. There was nowhere to hide, and that was the point. Nudity, in the Greek mind, was truth. Away from the physical act of training, the gymnasium served as a gathering place of the mind. Philosophers debated under olive trees, discussing the nature of virtue and the soul. Musicians practiced their lyres while others listened. Young men discussed poetry, reciting lines from Homer while still slick with oil and sweat. This was the cradle of the Greek ideal, arete, or excellence in all things, both physical and intellectual. Menon would often pause the training to pose questions. What is more important? To be beautiful in form or noble in character? He'd ask. One youth responded, is it not the same? The body reflects the soul. Another added, we sculpt statues of heroes because their bodies show us their virtue. Diodoros remained quiet, absorbing every word. He began to understand why nudity here wasn't merely a matter of practicality or fashion. It was philosophy made flesh. In their nakedness, the Greeks believed, people stood before the gods in purity. Clothing was a distraction, a layer of deceit. In nudity, the truth of a man was laid bare, not just physically, but spiritually. This ideal extended beyond the gymnasium. In the great statues of the city, those crafted by Phidias and Polykleitos, heroes and gods alike were nude. Achilles spearing a foe, Heracles leaning on his club. Even Apollo, eternal and youthful, stood without shame. These images adorned temples and city squares, not to titillate, but to inspire. At festivals like the Panathenea, athletes competed in the nude before thousands. Victors were showered not with gold, but with olive wreaths and songs. To win while naked was to prove oneself in the eyes of all, not through deception or wealth, but through effort and strength. Of course, not all Greeks were equally enamored with the practice. In Sparta, nudity had its own ritualistic function, but their views leaned toward the utilitarian. Spartan girls too trained naked, a shocking idea to many Athenians. Elsewhere, in conservative corners of the mainland, elders frowned at the youth's boldness. There was a time, muttered one grizzled man at the baths, when dignity came with drapery. Even women's nudity was a more complex matter. Respectable women were expected to remain covered in public, their modesty tied to family honor. But in certain religious rituals, such as the cult of Artemis at Bruron or during the Eleusinian mysteries, women did bare themselves, not in vulgarity, but as a spiritual act. The body, even the female body, held power, and that power could be sacred. As weeks passed, Diodoros shed more than just his tunic. He shed fear, he shed insecurity, he shed the idea that his worth was in how others judged his body. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult match, Menon handed him a flask of water. "You've learned well," he said. "What do you see now when you look at yourself?" Diodoros thought. His arms were stronger, his chest broader. But more than that, he no longer flinched at his own reflection. "I see someone honest," he said. Menon smiled. "That is the first step toward wisdom." And so, the days passed, turning into months. Diodoros trained, debated, studied and bathed, all in the company of his fellow citizens, all without shame. He had come to understand the essence of the Greek view on nudity. It was not about vanity, but about truth. It was not about rebellion, but about harmony with nature. The gods had created man in a perfect form. To hide that form was to question divine design. In the city of Athens, beneath the watching eyes of statues and stars, the naked form was not a secret to be hidden. It was a hymn, sung in flesh, to the glory of being alive. The morning fog clung to the distant hills like a silken veil, reluctant to surrender its grip on the waking earth. Athenian rooftops, still cool from the night's breeze, glistened faintly with dew, though the promise of heat loomed above. In the quiet, before the city's heartbeat rose to its full rhythm, Diodoros walked the now familiar path to the gymnasium. The stones underfoot no longer stung with shyness. His body no longer moved with hesitation. There was a quiet confidence in his gait, earned not through pride, but through a growing understanding of who he was, and more importantly, what his culture saw in him. The gymnasium had not changed. Columns still towered like giants made of stone. The air still held the mingling scent of olive oil, dust, and sweat. The wrestling rings were already filling with bodies in motion. Sunlight spilled across backs and shoulders like divine approval. But what had changed was his place in it. He was no longer the boy on the threshold, eyes wide with embarrassment and disbelief. Now others watched him, new boys unsure of their limbs, their voices cracking as they greeted the world. Diodoros was not yet a man, but he had stepped firmly onto the path. Menon was waiting near the central courtyard, arms crossed, his chest bare and glistening with oil from his own warm-up. "You're early," he said, though there was a glimmer of approval in his tone. "I slept little," Diodoros replied. "I dreamed of the games." "Ah," Menon said, his smile creasing the corners of his mouth. "Olympia haunts your thoughts already." "Not just Olympia," Diodoros said quietly. "The soul, too." Menon's brow raised slightly, and for a moment he said nothing. Then, with a slow nod, he gestured toward the benches beneath the plane trees. "Sit. If you are dreaming of souls, then we speak not as trainer and pupil, but as men." The two sat in the cool shade, the din of morning drills providing a rhythm beneath their words. Diodoros had never known how much he'd longed for these moments. Quiet discussions, where one's body rested, but the mind ran free. "Tell me," Menon began, "what is the purpose of training in the nude?" Diodoros considered carefully. "To know oneself, to strip away illusions." "A good answer," Menon said. "And what else?" Diodoros hesitated. "To confront shame and destroy it. Better still." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "But there is more. The gymnasium is not a place for flesh alone. It is a forge for the soul. The body, bare and honest, teaches the mind to be the same. When you wrestle, you are not only testing your limbs, but your judgment, your courage, your endurance. When you stand unclothed among others, You learn humility, because no body is perfect, and you learn pride, because you are unafraid. You begin to see others not as rivals, but as mirrors. The words struck Diodoros deeply. He realized he had begun to look at the human form with new eyes, not through desire or envy, but with a sense of awe. Every scar, every muscle, every imperfection told a story. Some boys were lean, their muscles taut like the strings of a lyre. Others were broader, slower, but unyielding. Even the older men, whose skin sagged slightly and bore the creases of time, carried with them an undeniable dignity. They had lived, fought, taught, and their bodies were maps of those journeys. Later that morning, Diodoros joined the others for calisthenics in the outer ring. He greeted Callias, a lanky youth from the neighboring deme, who had a crooked smile and unmatched energy. Together, they ran the perimeter, kicking up dust, their feet pounding in unison. They were joined by Iason, the son of a sculptor, whose father had once carved a frieze for the Parthenon. Iason's body was small but lithe, and he moved like a dancer. As they trained, their laughter rang out, echoing off the columns. There was joy here, joy in movement, joy in togetherness, joy in the shared vulnerability of nakedness. What others might call shame, the Greeks transformed into camaraderie. That afternoon, the trainer Pelagon, a stern Spartan who had once fought in the Peloponnesian War, gathered the youth for a lesson beneath the olive trees. His scarred torso bore witness to a dozen battles, and he spoke with the rough gravity of a man who had seen too much. In Sparta, he said, we train naked from childhood. We eat little, sleep little, speak little, but we learn discipline, control, precision. The Athenian boys listened, rapt. You Athenians, Pelagon continued, are softer. You have poetry and art, symposiums and debates. You believe in beauty. And yet, he paused, his gaze sweeping across the young faces. And yet you also understand the power of nakedness, not as brutality, but as elevation. In your gymnasia, the body is sacred, the mind is sharpened. Even love finds its place. Some of the boys shifted uncomfortably. The topic of love, particularly between males, was one spoken of quietly, often in riddles or verse. But Pelagon met their unease with honesty. Eros, he said, is not to be feared. The love between an older man and his eromenos, his beloved, when respectful and virtuous, teaches the youth more than drills ever could. It was Socrates himself who said that love is the ladder to the divine. The gymnasium, after all, was not merely a place for sweat and competition. It was a place where bonds formed, deep, emotional, sometimes even romantic. It was not uncommon for older men to mentor younger boys, guiding them not only in training but in philosophy, manners, and virtue. These relationships, when pure in intent, were considered honorable. Diodoros had seen such pairs, like Thales and his protege Nicias, sharing oil before practice, reading scrolls together after training. There was affection there, but not possession. It was not about dominance, it was about inspiration. That night, after the baths had been taken and the final matches fought, Diodoros walked alone through the quiet courtyard. The sun had dipped below the rooftops and the moon hung pale above the Acropolis. The marble statues cast long shadows, and the flickering torches painted the air with warm light. He paused before a statue of Hermes, the god of athletes, of travelers, of boundaries crossed. The god stood naked as all gods did, his form youthful and perfect. But Diodoros no longer saw just a body. He saw discipline, energy, freedom. He saw the ideal. Not because it was without flaw, but because it aspired. As he stood in silence, A voice joined him. "You look as though you're praying," said Iason, who had emerged from the baths. "Not praying," Diodoros replied. "Thinking." "About what?" "Why we do this," Diodoros said, gesturing to the gymnasium, to the statue, to their bare bodies under moonlight. "Why we show ourselves." Iason stepped closer. "Because we trust each other." That simple truth settled between them like a stone in calm water. They sat on the marble steps, the city behind them pulsing softly with the hum of night. Their skin, still warm from exertion, cooled in the gentle breeze. "The Persians think us strange," Diodorus said. "Even the Egyptians cover themselves in linen robes, yet we strip down as if it were our birthright." "It is our birthright," Iason said. "We worship the human form because we believe the gods made it well." There was no arrogance in his tone, only belief. In time, Diodoros would come to see the gymnasium as something far greater than he had ever imagined. It was a theater of humanity, a place where the soul was sculpted with as much care as the body. Nudity in this world was the language of truth. When you trained without clothes, you trained without masks. When you walked through the city unclothed, you made a vow that you were ready to be seen. He would still hear the murmurs of foreign guests, still witness the discomfort of travelers unfamiliar with such customs. He would even see new boys, years later, standing on the same threshold where he once trembled. And to them, he would say what Menon had once said to him, "Leave your doubts with your tunic." The scent of the olive groves rolled in with the morning wind, a mixture of sweet fruit and dusty leaves stirred by the breeze off Mount Hymettus. The shadows cast by the colonnades of the Lycian were long, drawn across the flagstones like the marks of ancient calligraphy. The chatter of morning philosophers was already drifting into the gymnasium courtyard, their debates dancing between Plato's forms and Heraclitus' ever-changing fire. Somewhere nearby, water trickled into a basin, soothing and steady. Diodoros arrived barefoot, his tunic already folded over one arm, his body glistening with a thin sheen of oil. By now his appearance drew no special notice, neither from trainers nor from peers. He belonged to the rhythm of the place. His steps followed the unseen beat of centuries, Athenians who had passed this way before him, bare of cloth but full of spirit. But this morning there was an unfamiliar presence in the gymnasium. A delegation from Thebes had arrived, youths of similar age, but strangers to the customs of Athens. Some of them looked around with subtle curiosity. Others, cloaked still in their regional garments, bore expressions of mild disapproval as they witnessed the naked bodies of Athenian boys running drills, tumbling in the sand, stretching under the sun. Thebes was a city of warriors and farmers, proud and austere. Though nudity was not foreign to them, after all, the Olympic tradition was pan-Hellenic, there was a stark difference in tone. In Thebes, the body was a tool, not a canvas. It was meant for war, not for art. It was to be hardened, not celebrated. Menon greeted the visitors formally, his own body bronzed by years of sun, with scars that told stories in silence. "You are welcome here," he said, voice resonant across the courtyard. "We train as our ancestors did, with nothing but the will and the flesh." One Theban boy, tall and thick with muscle, stepped forward. "Do you not find shame in bearing everything, among strangers?" A few of the Athenians bristled, but Menon merely smiled. "No more than a tree finds shame in the wind. The gods gave us this form, and we wear it without deceit." The Thebans were offered time to observe, to train, even to compete in friendly matches. Diodoros, though initially uneasy at their gazes, soon forgot them in the joy of movement. He sparred with Callias, their bodies twisting in the sand, muscles taut with effort, sweat flying in arcs as they rolled. Around them, Others ran laps or lifted stones. The courtyard became a hive of purposeful motion. In the heat of midday, the shade beneath the olive trees became a haven. There, boys and men sat unclothed, drinking watered wine and discussing everything from military campaigns to verses by Sappho. One of the Theban visitors, a boy named Myron, sat across from Diodoros. His cloak lay discarded nearby, his skin pale compared to the sun-bronzed Athenians. He spoke with a quiet voice. "You train as though the gods themselves watch you." Diodoros sipped his wine. "Don't they?" Myron smiled slightly. "We do not speak of the gods so casually in Thebes." "Then perhaps your gods are distant," said Iason, lounging nearby. "Ours walk among us. Apollo shoots his bow in the sun. Hermes dances in every step. Dionysus drinks at our tables." The conversation turned towards sculpture, how the Greek world idealized the human body in art. Myron admitted that despite Theban restraint, he had often admired the statues of naked athletes in Delphi. "They seem so fearless," he said, "so complete." Diodoros leaned back on his elbows, the sun catching the fine hairs on his chest. "That's the truth of it. We bear ourselves not to shock, but to show that we fear nothing, not even judgment." Later that week, games were held in honor of the visitors. They were not official contests, but friendly exhibitions. Races around the track, discus throws, wrestling bouts. Athenians and Thebans competed side by side, naked, oiled, and under the eyes of peers and trainers. The climax came in the form of a relay race. Teams of 4, 2 Athenians, 2 Thebans per side, passed a baton around the palestra in full sprints. Dust rose in plumes as feet pounded the earth, muscles flexing with each explosive step. Diodoros ran the final leg for his team. His feet were wings. The wind kissed his face, the crowd's shouts a blur in his ears. He did not win, but when he crossed the finish line, lungs burning, legs trembling, he felt no shame, only the thrill of being alive, utterly, completely, in his own skin. The Thebans left 2 days later. Not all had joined the exercises. Some still disapproved, but Myron had trained beside Diodoros the final morning, both of them silent as they stretched and moved beneath the rising sun. Before departing, Myron offered a final word. "You Athenians are strange," he said, "but I think I envy you." Diodoros smiled. "Then perhaps you understand us better than most." In the weeks that followed, life returned to its usual rhythm, but something had shifted, subtle, like a new breeze from a different quarter. The visit had reminded Diodoros of the uniqueness of his culture, of how intimately nudity was woven into the Athenian way of life, not just in body, but in mind. He walked through the agora one morning, passing a sculptor's workshop. There, under scaffolding and shaded cloth, stood a statue in progress, an Ephebi, nude, poised mid-stride. The sculptor was applying fine detail to the musculature, his chisel tapping gently against stone. Diodoros paused, watching. The statue was neither god nor hero, but a youth like himself. Imperfect, yes, but noble. It struck him that the Greeks did not need their figures to be flawless to consider them beautiful. Truth, even with blemish, was more divine than illusion. Elsewhere in the city, other signs of this belief were evident. In the baths, men of every age shared space, cleansing themselves not only of dust, but of worry. There were no hierarchies in nakedness. The rich merchant, the humble potter, the poet, they all stripped themselves down and entered the same water. It was an equalizer, a kind of democratic ritual where status meant nothing and the body spoke louder than the purse. Even the symposiums, where men reclined on couches and discussed politics or poetry, encouraged a kind of bodily freedom. Robes slid casually from shoulders. A bare chest was no scandal. In this relaxed state, minds opened more easily, and truth flowed like wine. And then there were the religious rituals, the festival of Dionysia, where boundaries dissolved under the sway of music and drink, often led to states where clothing was cast aside, and the body moved unrestrained in ecstatic dance. It was not lewdness, it was communion. In surrendering clothing, Greeks believed one surrendered the ego, allowing a closer connection to the divine. Still, even in such a culture, boundaries existed. Women of status remained mostly clothed in public. Their modesty was tied not to morality, but to custom and role. Yet, in private rites, such as the Thesmophoria or certain dances to honor Artemis, women too would uncover their bodies before the goddess. Nudity, in that sense, transcended gender. It was a state of spiritual openness, not merely physical exposure. Diodoros often thought on this as he trained. The body was not just an instrument, it was a symbol, a message. To show it without shame was to announce to the world, I am human, I am striving, I have nothing to hide. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the Acropolis and the city bathed in amber light, Menon gathered the boys in the sand ring. He held a scroll in his hand, worn and creased with age. It is time you heard from Solon, he said, the lawgiver of Athens, who once wrote, nothing in excess. He paused, then added, yet when it comes to the body, moderation does not mean hiding. It means honoring, not flaunting it, not denying it, but understanding it. This flesh is our home. It is our chariot. It carries our soul through the world. If we do not know it, if we cannot show it, then how can we know or show anything else? The boys sat in silence, the words sinking into the pores of their minds like oil on their skin. As stars emerged in the sky, Diodoros reclined under the great fig tree near the edge of the palestra. He looked down at himself, not with vanity, but with quiet reflection. This was the same body that had once trembled with fear, once curled in hesitation. Now it stood firm, bore scars from matches, calluses from stone lifting, sunlines from training. He did not yet have all the answers, but he knew this. To be naked was to begin an inquiry, a discipline, a life of courage and candor. He was no longer merely a boy in Athens. He was becoming Athenian. The first rains of autumn had swept across the Attic sky the night before, washing the dust from the rooftops and leaving the streets of Athens shining like polished stone. The scent of wet earth mingled with the ever-present sweetness of pressed olives, and the air carried a coolness that made the skin prickle with pleasure. In the quiet hours before, the agora, filled with footsteps and voices, Diodoros stood in the garden of his father's estate, the sky above streaked with the last lavender hues of dawn. He was naked, save for the breeze that moved softly through the olive trees, and he stood as still as the statues that lined the path before him. To the side of the garden, the family's small shrine to Apollo caught the morning light, and Diodoros bowed his head slightly as he passed it. His morning ritual had evolved in the months since he had begun training in the gymnasium, not only in his body, which had hardened and grown lean, but in his spirit. Where once he rose late and groggy, now he woke with purpose. He oiled his skin in silence. He stretched in the sunlight, not to show, but to feel his limbs, his breath, his pulse like a hymn in motion. In the center of the garden, beneath a laurel tree, stood a marble statue. It depicted a kouros, an idealized youth, naked, poised in forward motion, his face serene and eyes carved wide open. His genitals were small and unassuming, not exaggerated, for the Greeks valued balance, not bravado. The statue had stood there since Diodoros could remember, But now, with the changes in his own life, he saw it differently. He approached it slowly, studying its lines. The marble, once bright, had yellowed with age, streaked with water stains and lichen at the base. But its form remained strong. Powerful thighs, straight spine, lips parted ever so slightly. This was not just a sculpture of a man. It was a monument to an idea that the human form, when seen truthfully, could reflect something immortal. He stood beside it, mirroring its pose. The cool breeze passed over his skin, and for a moment, he imagined himself in stone, timeless, ageless, caught between tension and stillness. Was this what the sculptors saw when they worked? Flaws made holy by the chisel? His thoughts were interrupted by the clatter of sandals on the stone path. His father, Philostratos, approached. The older man wore a simple chiton, but his arms were bare, muscular even in middle age. His beard was trimmed, and his gaze was sharp, though not unkind. "You meditate on the Kouros again?" Philostratos said. "I do," Diodoros replied. "He seems awake." "Indeed, that is the purpose. He is not a god, nor a man. He is what lies between, the aspiration." Philostratos joined his son at the statue's base. "When I was your age, I saw him only as marble. But after years in the field, after war, loss, and joy, I saw in him the bravery of vulnerability. The Kouros does not wear armor. He does not clench his fists. He does not shout. He simply is. Strong, bare, poised. Why do we not sculpt women in the same way?" Diodoros asked, tilting his head. "Are they not sacred?" "They are," Philostratos said. "But our customs are shaped by roles. The maiden is cloaked, veiled, protected, not because she is lesser, but because her power is inward, hidden. The male's virtue is in what he exposes, the risks he takes, the strength he shows. The female's is in what she guards, wisdom, mystery, birth." "But that is changing, isn't it?" Diodoros asked. "Perhaps," his father mused, "or perhaps we are just beginning to understand both sides more fully." At the gymnasium, later that day, Diodoros arrived to find that Menon had brought in a guest, Praxilla, a sculptor from Corinth, rare among artists not only for her talent but for her gender. She was middle-aged, her hair wrapped in a plain cloth, her fingers stained white with stone dust. The boys gathered with curious eyes. Few of them had ever seen a woman in this space. Menon raised a hand. "Today, you will learn how others see you." Praxilla stepped forward and addressed the crowd. "We sculptors do not invent beauty, we uncover it. The body is already a miracle. Our task is not to flatter it, but to find its truth." She walked slowly among the youths, who stood still, many of them self-conscious under her scrutiny. She observed their posture, their symmetry, their tension. "The body in repose tells as much as the body in motion," she said. "Look at how your muscles hold even when you think you are relaxed. Your fears live in your shoulders, your pride in your chin, your shame in how your knees bend." Diodoros felt a strange thrill being observed by this woman who was not lover, mother, or servant. Her gaze was not hungry, it was analytical, almost reverent. "Today," she said, "you will sculpt each other." There was a murmur of confusion. Menon explained. The boys would pair off and, using clay rather than stone, would attempt to sculpt each other's torsos, hands, faces, not perfectly, not professionally, but with intent, to see, to understand. Diodoros paired with Iason. They sat facing each other on low stools, their knees nearly touching, the clay between them soft and ready. At first they laughed, unsure of how to begin, but as they worked, the silence grew deeper. Diodoros focused on Iason's brow, the slight curve of his jaw, the way his collarbone dipped. He realized he had never really looked at another body this way, not with desire, not with comparison, but with inquiry. "What do you see?" Earson asked softly. "I see you," Diodoros answered, still pressing clay into shape. "Not the athlete, not the joker, just you." Later, when they displayed their amateur sculptures, the results were crude but strangely beautiful: misshapen torsos, over-exaggerated muscles, crooked noses. But Praxilla nodded. "You have looked. That is enough for now." That evening, back at home, Diodoros could not stop thinking about what it meant to see and to be seen. His culture had always celebrated the body, but now he understood that true nudity was not the lack of clothing. It was the lack of armor, the willingness to be observed without control. He sat again before the statue in the garden, this time by moonlight. The Kouros, pale and ghostly in the silver light, seemed to breathe. Diodoros whispered to it, "Do you ever tire of being seen?" The statue, silent as always, gave no reply, but Diodoros thought he knew the answer. No, because to be seen, as one truly is the highest form of trust. And trust, like the body, is sacred. The city swelled with noise and motion, its streets vibrating beneath the footfalls of thousands. It was the eve of the Panathenaic Games, and Athens had become a living festival. Garlands looped between marble pillars, flutes echoing through alleyways, vendors shouting over one another about bread, honey cakes, amphorae of sweet wine. Musicians strummed their lyres in shaded corners. Philosophers argued beneath painted porticos. Every voice seemed to rise together in praise of the city, of the gods, of life itself. It was a time not of solemnity, but of vitality, raw, glowing, naked vitality. Diodoros stood at the crest of the Areopagus Hill, gazing out over the Acropolis and the sprawling sea of rooftops below. The golden dome of Athena's temple shimmered in the early sun, like a flame captured in marble. His body was bare, save for a simple leather belt tied loosely around his waist, marking him as a young citizen in training, an athlete of the gymnasium. But unlike the first time he had disrobed before others, trembling with uncertainty, he now bore his nudity like a votive offering, open, reverent, unashamed. The gymnasium had trained more than his muscles. It had trained his understanding. His flesh was not shameful. It was sacred. In Athens, to stand unclothed was not to defy civility, but to celebrate one's identity. From where he stood, he could see the long lines forming at the Panathenaic Way, the wide, stone-paved avenue that would soon fill with citizens, metics, slaves, and visiting foreigners, all assembling to watch the sacred procession. The games were not merely entertainment. They were religion, politics, theater, and ritual, all wrapped into one, an expression of the polis soul. This year, Diodoros had been chosen to march among the Epheboi, the elite group of 18-year-olds who, after a full year of physical and civic training, would represent the future of Athens in the public eye. They would walk nude, as tradition demanded, their oiled skin glistening in the sunlight, bearing torches, symbols, and standards as the crowd watched and cheered. His heart swelled with a mix of pride and nervousness. Even now, months into his transformation, there remained a tremor in his soul when he thought of walking before all of Athens. Thousands of eyes would rest on him, on his friends, on their exposed forms. What would they see? Would they see strength, vulnerability, truth? Diodoros. He turned to see Callias, waving from the steps of the Lycaon, breathless, cheeks flushed. "They're assembling early. Come, we're to walk through the Keramikos gate at first light." Together they joined the throng of young men gathered outside the gymnasium. Trainers moved among them, inspecting their posture, issuing reminders. Stand tall, do not fidget, do not smile foolishly. You represent the city, the gymnasium, your ancestors. You walk as the embodiment of arete, excellence in body and spirit. At sunrise, the air still clung with a chill, but the excitement of the moment burned like a furnace in their veins. The ceremony began at the Dipylon Gate, the great northern entrance to Athens. Citizens lined the street. Even older women, those rarely seen in public events, stood behind veils, peeking between fingers to see the new generation of men. By torchlight, the boys were oiled by their paidotroubai, the gymnastic instructors who had guided them for a year. The olive oil was mixed with slight touches of myrrh and citrus bark, and its scent drifted like incense as it was massaged into shoulders, thighs, arms, bellies. The ritual of oiling was both functional and symbolic. It protected the skin, warmed the muscles, and honored the gods. To shine in the sun was to reflect Apollo himself. Diodoros closed his eyes as Menon's hands moved across his shoulders, applying the oil in slow, practiced circles. Remember, Menon whispered, this is not about beauty. It is about clarity. The people must see the truth in you. He nodded. And then, with only the sandals on their feet and the sun on their backs, the procession began. They passed through the city like a river of youth. Bare, bronzed, radiant. Women threw flower petals. Men clapped and cheered. Foreigners watched with astonishment, some admiring, others disapproving. But none looked away. Along the route, they passed the painted stoa, where old men of the Areopagus Council sat under red and black murals depicting past battles. Their weathered faces did not leer or scoff. They looked on with the quiet gaze of those who had once walked the same path and now measured the future in the form of unadorned bodies. The youths passed the marketplace, where vendors paused mid-transaction to watch. They passed the courts, where lawyers stopped their arguments. They passed the schools, where children cried out in excitement, some pointing at favorite older brothers or cousins. Finally, they arrived at the foot of the Acropolis. There, in the great courtyard of Athena, the procession ended. Each youth raised his torch toward the sky, and the flames crackled like applause. Diodoros stood still, his chest rising and falling slowly. Sweat clung to his brow. His skin gleamed under the sun's growing weight. He felt like a statue brought to life. Later, as the crowds dispersed and the city returned to its daily buzz, the athletes prepared for the games themselves. Wrestling, running, discus, javelin, pankration, all performed nude as the gods intended. As Diodoros waited for his turn in the foot race, he sat under an awning with Iason and Callias. Around them, competitors stretched and talked quietly, some bouncing on the balls of their feet, others lost in meditation. Iason looked at Diodoros. Do you ever wonder how this looks to someone from Egypt or Persia? All the time, he said. To them, we must look mad, naked, shouting, sweating under the sun. And yet, Callias added, they send their sons to be taught in our schools, to listen to our philosophers, to admire our statues. They fear us and envy us, Diodoros said, because we do not fear ourselves. Just then, the official called his name. Diodoros rose, wiped his palms on his thighs, and stepped into the track's starting line. The sand beneath his feet was warm. The sky above was endless. He ran. The world blurred into breath, heartbeat, motion. Muscles coiled and released. His feet struck the earth with precision, driving him forward like the oar of a trireme through water. He didn't win the race, but he finished strong, and as he caught his breath, He looked up to see the crowd clapping, not for a victor, but for all who had dared to run. That evening, after the games, a small symposium was held under the plane trees by the Ilissos River. Torches lit the faces of the attendees. Wine flowed, diluted and tempered by the wisdom of the elders. No formal speeches, no arrogance, just talk, truth. Menon sat with the boys, his own tunic open at the chest. "You were seen today," he said, "all of you, and you did not falter." Diodoros sipped from his clay cup. It felt right, as if the city had opened its eyes. "It has," Menon said, "because you reminded it of what it was always meant to be. Athens is not walls or temples. Athens is its people, naked and unafraid." After the others had gone, Diodoros remained at the riverbank. The moon shimmered on the water, silver and shifting. He slipped from his tunic and stepped into the shallows, letting the cool stream lap against his legs, his waist, his chest. He dove beneath the surface, and for a moment there was only silence, weightlessness, peace. When he emerged, the world felt softer, wiser. On the walk home, his body damp, his feet bare on the stones, he passed by a small family shrine. An elderly woman knelt beside it, lighting incense. She glanced up as he passed, and he paused, wondering if she would scold him for being undressed. But instead, she nodded slowly. "Go in strength," she said. "The gods do not clothe themselves. Why should you?" And so he walked on, the night wrapping around him like a cloak of stars. He was not naked. He was free. Autumn crept through Athens with golden feet, brushing across the rust-colored rooftops and the dry leaves that tumbled through the agora like discarded thoughts. The city was quieter in the weeks after the Panathenaic Games. The fanfare had subsided, and the crowds had dispersed back to their homes, their villages, their islands. But within the stone walls of the Lykion, the rhythm of thought never ceased. Diodoros's footsteps echoed faintly through the open colonnade of the Lykion's west wing. The familiar stones beneath his soles now comfort rather than challenge. Here, under the tutelage of the philosophers, he found a different form of training, not of the limbs, but of the mind. And still, as always, they learned and debated naked. Not everyone studied philosophy unclothed. But here, at the Lykion, among the students of Aristotle and his disciples, it was customary. As in the gymnasium, the naked body here was a kind of intellectual honesty. One could not argue a position while hiding one's self. To speak in the nude was to speak with nothing to shield oneself from judgment. Every gesture, every word laid bare, as unadorned as one's body. He sat on the marble bench, nearest the olive tree, where shadows danced across the columns, and the air smelled of sun-warmed stone and the lingering oil of morning rituals. Across from him sat Theodectes, a scholar and former dramatist, now turned teacher of dialectic and moral philosophy. He was older than Menon, older even than Diodoros's father. His body bore the signs of age: sagging skin, pale blotches, a constellation of moles across his chest. But he sat without shame. In his bearing, there was dignity, not of youth, but of wisdom. "You walk like a man who has seen his own death," Theodectes said. Diodoros blinked. "I don't understand." "Good," the older man replied. "You shouldn't." There was a pause as Diodoros frowned slightly, then asked, "Do you always begin lessons with riddles?" Theodectes gave a dry smile. "Only the ones worth remembering." From across the courtyard, another group of students sparred in spoken word, arguing over whether virtue was innate or learned. Their voices rose and fell with heat. But Theodectes waved them off. "Come," he said, "walk with me." They rose and moved beneath the row of cypress trees that lined the Lykion's boundary, where the noise of the city softened. They walked slowly, both of them naked, their bodies unburdened, the earth cool underfoot. Theodectes walked with a slight limp, a relic of some old injury, but he moved with the grace of someone unconcerned by appearances. Diodoros, walking beside him, tried to quiet the self-conscious voice still lingering in the corners of his mind. He had grown stronger in the gymnasium, yes. He had learned the pride of walking nude in the Panathenaic parade, yes. But this was different. It was one thing to display one's body in motion, racing or wrestling. It was another entirely to carry oneself unclothed, in stillness, in conversation, in thought. "Why are we naked now?" Theodectes asked suddenly, as if reading his mind. "Because we are in Athens," Diodoros offered. Theodectes chuckled. A fair start, but too vague. He stopped walking and turned to Diodoros. "Clothing is a shield, a pretense. When you wear a fine robe, you signal wealth, taste, station. When you wear armor, you signal threat or fear. When you wear nothing, you signal truth, or at least the willingness to be judged." Diodoros nodded slowly. "Like in the gymnasium." "Yes, but here," Theodectes said, gesturing to the Lycian around them, "the body is not honed for contest. It is honed for clarity. It teaches us to be humble in our philosophy, to see the flaws in our arguments as we see the blemishes on our skin." Diodoros frowned thoughtfully. "But what if the world laughs at our flaws?" Theodectes' expression grew serious. "Then the world is still ignorant, and you must teach it by being unafraid." They resumed their walk. Overhead, a hawk circled lazily. Below, the hush of sandals and voices continued in the courtyard beyond, a soft rhythm of philosophy in motion. That afternoon, under the fig tree near the reflecting pool, Theodectes gathered the students. They reclined on woolen mats, their bodies exposed to the sun, their thoughts turned inward. "I want each of you," Theodectes said, "to describe your own body aloud, as honestly as possible, without flattery, without shame." There was a silence, broken only by a sparrow chirping from the rooftop. "You, Nicandros," he said, pointing to a broad-shouldered boy with scars on his legs. "Begin." Nicandros cleared his throat. "My legs are thick, too thick. They make running difficult. I have a mole beneath my left shoulder. I dislike it. My belly is rounder than I would like." "Good," Theodectes said, "not because your body is flawed, but because your words are true." One by one the students spoke. Some hesitated, some joked to mask their discomfort, but all spoke eventually. When it was Diodoros's turn, he took a long breath. "My skin is darker now, from the sun. My shoulders have grown, though not as broad as others. My chest is firm, but shallow. My hip bones jut. I have a birthmark on my thigh, and my left hand is slightly crooked at the wrist." "Do you believe your body is beautiful?" Theodectes asked him. Diodoros paused. "I think it is mine, and I think it has served me well." The teacher nodded. "Better said than claiming beauty." He turned to the group. "This is the lesson. To name the truth is to tame it. Shame festers in silence, but when spoken aloud, it withers." In the days that followed, Diodoros carried those words like an amulet. He began to notice how others moved, how even the most confident youths bore some private discomfort. A boy with perfect teeth who never smiled, a strong discus thrower who hunched when idle, a tall youth who covered his groin more than necessary when bathing. We all carried something we feared others would see. But the irony was, in Athens, people did see, and they loved you for it. One evening at a symposium hosted by a family friend, Diodoros found himself among older men, politicians, poets, and soldiers. He was the youngest there, and though he wore a modest chiton, the wine flowed freely, and before long, many in the room had loosened or discarded their clothing. The conversation turned, as it often did, to ideals. "Do you know what separates us from the barbarians?" one grey-bearded man asked. "Our navy," someone joked. "Our taste," said another. "No," said a poet with coal under his eyes. "We are not afraid to be seen." He gestured to the reclining men, most of whom were bare. In Persia, they hide behind silks. In Egypt, behind gold and ritual. But here we uncover everything, our thoughts, our desires, our flaws, even in sculpture, even in mourning. Theodoros listened carefully, the wine warm in his blood. He had thought his gymnasium training had taught him all there was to know about nudity, but now he saw it extended far beyond sport. Nudity was Athenian democracy in action. To be seen, and to see others without artifice, without concealment. He recalled a moment from earlier that day, walking past a pottery workshop. Two apprentices had been arguing over a crater, both naked, their bodies streaked with clay. They shouted, gestured, finally laughed. They were utterly unself-conscious, their focus solely on the craft. Their nudity made them more real, not less. By the symposium's end, Diodorus sat with a new understanding. Nudity in Athens was not uniform. It was not demanded. It was offered. A gesture of trust. A contract between the self and the world that said, "I will not hide from you if you will not hide from me." Later that night, walking home beneath the moon, his chiton draped over one shoulder, he passed a stone pedestal where a new Kouros statue had been erected. He stopped and looked at it, another idealized youth, frozen mid-step, his marble eyes gazing into eternity. But for the first time, Diodorus did not see perfection. He saw effort. He saw vulnerability carved into stone. He saw himself, not as he was, but as he tried to be. And in that effort, in that naked reaching toward truth, he saw what it meant to be Greek. Not flawless, but fearless. The wind off the sea carried a salty freshness that swept through Athens like a cleansing breath. Late autumn had arrived, and with it came the cooling of the stones, the thinning of the crowds in the agora, and the whisper of winter preparing to settle gently over Attica. Yet even as the seasons turned, some things remained unchanged. The worship of the gods, and the way in which the people of Athens revealed themselves before them, naked, honest, unashamed. Diodorus stood in the temple court of the Erechtheion, his body exposed to the morning light, the sacred olive tree rustling just behind him. The rites of Apollo were underway, and while most of the city still slept, a chosen few gathered here at dawn to honor the god of light, music, and order. The priestess led the chanting. The others stood in reverent silence, their bodies bare, before the deity, whose statues showed him eternally youthful, lithe, perfect. This was no festival of lewdness, nor a celebration of vanity. This was solemnity carved in sunlight. Each participant was expected to strip themselves of the worldly and come before the god in the form they were born with, unmarred by fashion or pride. There were no robes, no jewelry, no painted faces, just skin and breath and faith. Beside Diodorus stood Lysandra, the daughter of a prominent sculptor and one of the few women permitted in this morning rite. Her nudity, like his, was quiet, dignified. There was no hint of shame between them, just mutual understanding. The body was not temptation, it was offering. Diodorus thought of the statues that filled the temples and sanctuaries across Greece, the gods themselves, always sculpted nude. Apollo, poised with his lyre, his chest open and relaxed, the curves of his body singing harmony with the marble. Hermes mid-stride, youthful and athletic, his manhood small and modest, for the Greeks believed that reason and control were more admirable than raw virility. Even the war god Ares was depicted unclothed, his power in his limbs rather than in his armor. The gods themselves had nothing to hide. Why then should mortals? The ritual ended with the slow, melodic playing of a flute. The air trembled with sound as the worshippers lowered their heads in final prayer. Diodoros, eyes closed, imagined himself dissolving into the sunlight, his form no different than those immortal beings in the sky. If the gods bore no clothing, then to strip was to ascend, even if only symbolically. Nudity, then, was a return, not regression to savagery, but progression to divine simplicity. Later that day, Diodoros visited the Academia, where Plato's followers still debated under fig trees and beside shallow fountains. The philosophers there had different ideas about nudity. Some saw it as a metaphor, others as a training method, still others as a social equalizer, but most accepted it as essential. "Have you ever wondered," said one elder named Philon, "why even Hephaestus, the crippled god, is sculpted nude?" A few heads turned, some chuckled. One student offered, "To show that even imperfection is holy." Philon nodded. Yes, the Greeks did not clothe their gods to protect them from mortal eyes. They made them naked to show us that even the divine is vulnerable, that beauty and weakness are not enemies, that divinity itself is bare. Diodoros remained after the others left. He sat alone beside the pond, watching dragonflies skimming across the surface. The sun had shifted, casting his own reflection across the water. He studied himself, not with vanity, but with curiosity. He was no longer a boy. His chest had broadened, his limbs had thickened. There were faint scars from the gymnasium and the games. The sun had darkened his shoulders. Yet what struck him most was not the form of his body, but how familiar it had become. He remembered vividly the first time he had stood nude before others. The panic, the fear of judgment, the awkward trembling limbs. Now he felt none of it. He could walk through the agora without shame. He could speak in the Lycion without fidgeting. He could bathe with strangers and meet their eyes, not their shoulders. It wasn't pride, it was peace. That night, a small gathering of artists and thinkers met at the home of Euthymenes, a famed painter known for depicting athletic and erotic scenes with equal reverence. The room was candlelit, filled with smoke and laughter, the scent of fig wine and rosemary clinging to the air. Reclining couches were spread in a circle, and as the wine flowed, robes fell away. Nudity here took on a different tone, not sacred, not athletic, but intimate. And yet, it was no less thoughtful. Euthymenes gestured toward a canvas at the center of the room. It showed 3 male figures, standing side by side, one slender, one muscular, one stocky. All were nude, painted in brilliant detail. "This," he said, "is not a study in anatomy. It is a study in truth." The guests murmured in approval. "We all know the statues of Apollo," Euthymenes continued, "but what of the man who carries amphorae all day? Or the boy who stammers when he speaks? Or the old priest who limps through the agora? Are they not also divine?" Diodoros spoke quietly. "In the gymnasium, we learn to admire the body for its function, but in the temple, we revere it as sacred. And here," he looked around at the soft eyes and the bare forms, "here it is loved." "Exactly," Euthymenes said, 3 mirrors of the same thing: utility, divinity, affection. Another guest, a soft-spoken woman named Aglauros, added, "And don't forget the 4th, vulnerability. It is not only gods who are unclothed. It is the slave at the whipping post, the sick in the hospice, the dead on the pyre, We are always naked when we are most honest. The words settled over the room like incense. No one spoke for a long moment. Then quietly, a lyre began to play. The gathering drifted into silence and thought, the flickering candlelight casting shadows on bare shoulders, hips, arms, bodies not judged, but simply present. Diodoros left near midnight, walking alone through the cool streets, the stones smooth underfoot. He passed a priest of Dionysus, sleeping beside a fountain, his robe fallen open. He passed a pair of lovers leaning into each other, barely clothed, lost in some silent conversation. The night held no secrets in Athens, or rather, it held them out in the open. He reached home and stood in the courtyard garden, the moon catching the edges of the Kouros statue he'd grown up with. Its stillness had always comforted him, but now he looked upon it with a different eye. It was not still. It was patient. It waited not to be admired, but to be understood. He stood beside it, as he had so many times before. But this time, he did not imitate its pose. He merely stood, relaxed, watching the moonlight travel across its carved flanks, and he said softly, not in prayer, but in statement, "You are not ashamed, neither am I." The wind answered, not with words, but with silence, the kind of silence that affirms. Nudity, Diodoros now knew, was not just a custom. It was not just a ritual or a tradition. It was a philosophy, a commitment to honesty, to clarity, to reverence. It was a reminder that in the end, all humans stood equal before the gods, bare of wealth, of clothing, of illusion. And in that nakedness was the beginning of everything sacred. Winter whispered its first warnings in the stillness of the morning air, and though the sun still climbed confidently above the hills of Attica, its warmth had softened. The olive trees dropped their leaves with reluctant grace. The stone steps of the Acropolis held on to the cold longer. Even the dogs in the agora curled tighter in shaded corners. And for the first time in months, the citizens of Athens began to wrap themselves once more in wool and linen. Diodoros stood at the edge of the agora, his cloak loosely draped across one shoulder. He hadn't tied it. The cold was not yet bitter, and more than that, he disliked the sensation of being entirely covered again. Nudity, once a foreign and disquieting experience, had become his resting state. Now, clothing felt more like performance than privacy. All around him, people bustled in the low golden light. Women in modest garments walked in pairs, carrying baskets of figs and pomegranates. Older men huddled in philosophical knots, rubbing their beards and arguing about policy or Plato. Children ran, half-dressed, kicking dried reeds and shouting with delight. And here and there, as always, the body remained visible. A group of young boys from the Palaestra ran across the open square, naked and laughing, covered in dust. A pair of older athletes stood beside a fountain, scraping the sweat and oil from their skin with curved strigils. A sculptor sat in the shade with his tunic pushed down to his waist, sketching the posture of a sleeping dog. In Athens, even in winter, the body was never fully hidden. But Diodoros's thoughts this morning were not on the athletic field, nor the gymnasium, nor the naked gods of the temples. Today he had been invited to a symposium on the nature of modesty, a discussion hosted not in a school or garden, but in the private home of Aristion, a wealthy philosopher and former statesman. It was an unusual topic. The Athenians had no singular definition of modesty, no strict law against the display of the body. And yet, modesty lived everywhere in the city's customs, in the drape of a chiton, in the tilt of the head, in the silences that filled gaps in speech. To strip naked was not always to abandon modesty, and to be clothed was not always to possess it. He reached Aristion's home as the last of the guests arrived. The building stood tall and wide near the northern wall, painted with frescoes and adorned with statues of Artemis and Demeter, goddesses of wildness and motherhood, of restraint and power. A servant opened the door. "You are expected," he said simply. Inside, a group had gathered. Unlike the usual symposia Diodorus attended, filled with young athletes, oil and ease, this was an older crowd. Most of them wore full robes, though their feet were bare and their hair unbound. Among them were several women, rare in such gatherings, and even rarer still, they had been invited not as entertainers or flute girls, but as participants. Aristian stood to welcome them all. He was a tall man, nearing 60, with skin the color of sanded bronze and a scar that cut across his left eyebrow. His voice, when he spoke, was deep and deliberate. "My friends," he began, "today we speak of veils, not only of cloth, but of meaning, of when the body reveals too much or too little. We ask, what is modesty and who defines it?" The guests murmured and nodded. Some sat cross-legged on cushions. Others leaned against the painted columns. A few, including Diodorus, chose to stand. The discussion began with formality. A young rhetorician cited examples from Homer, noting that even Odysseus, shipwrecked and ragged, was given a cloak by Nausicaa before entering her city. He could not walk among clothed people as a naked man, he said. He would have been seen as mad, or worse. But a woman across the room challenged him. And yet, when he stood before her, bare and salt-covered, she did not flee. She admired him. "She pitied him," the man corrected. Perhaps she saw him more clearly than she saw her own father, who always hid behind his royal robes. Laughter flickered in the air. Diodorus listened, absorbing. He thought of how, even in Athens, not all bodies were equally accepted. It was true that male athletes were celebrated for their nudity, that philosophers debated nude, that gods were carved without shame, but women? Their relationship to nudity was vastly different. Even the goddesses, Artemis, Athena, Hera, were rarely shown nude in classical sculpture. Their power was wrapped in dignity, their beauty suggested rather than exposed. Only Aphrodite, goddess of desire, was regularly shown without garments, and even then, she was usually depicted mid-act of covering herself, her nudity framed as something caught in transition, not proudly declared. At the symposium, the conversation deepened. A middle-aged woman named Melita stood and disrobed from her himation with slow, deliberate motion. She wore only a simple tunic beneath, tied loosely at one shoulder. Her gesture was not erotic, it was theatrical, symbolic. "I do not remove my clothing to invite your lust," she said, "but to challenge your gaze. You praise male nudity as truth. Yet when a woman is unclothed, you ask what she is offering, not what she is saying." The room quieted. She untied the knot at her shoulder and let the tunic fall to her feet. "I am 43. I have borne 2 children. My belly is soft. My thighs are thick. My breasts sag. Does this offend the ideals of your gymnasium?" No one answered. Aristian smiled. "Modesty," he said, "is the invention of those who are uncomfortable with the real." Diodorus felt something shift in his chest. He had never seen a woman deliberately stripped before a group without erotic intent. There was something fierce in it, something unbending. Melita stood like a statue, not of Aphrodite, but of Artemis in battle, or Athena before war. She dressed again without ceremony, and the discussion moved on. Later, Diodorus lingered in the courtyard garden, watching vines curl around a marble pillar. Aristian joined him, cloaked but barefoot. "You're quiet," the older man said. "I'm thinking," Diodorus replied. "About Melita?" Diodorus nodded. I was proud to walk naked in the Panathenaic parade, but I see now how easily pride becomes blindness. Aristian chuckled. Ah, you are learning. Nudity in Athens is a great gift, but also a mirror. It shows not only your body, but your beliefs. Diodoros turned toward him. Do you believe women should be nude as freely as men? I believe everyone should be free to speak with their whole selves. If that requires clothing, then so be it. If it requires its removal, then let it be done without scandal. He paused. But the danger lies not in the body. The danger lies in the gaze. Diodoros looked down at his own hands. He had thought nudity was the final step, that once one shed their garments, nothing else remained to hide. But now, he saw that even a naked body could wear armor, pride, performance, assumption. True modesty was not what one covered. It was the humility to understand what one revealed. That night, Diodoros returned home and stood once more before the Kouros in his garden. The statue had begun to seem less remote, less divine, more like a companion. He touched its marble shoulder. You do not speak, he said, but you say everything. Then slowly, he turned away and stepped into the shadows. For the first time in months, he wrapped his cloak around himself, not to hide, not to conform, but to remind himself that modesty, like nudity, was a language. And every language had its moment to be spoken. Winter's chill had begun to loosen its grip on Athens, retreating slowly before the tentative warmth of early spring. The city was awakening once more. The markets buzzed with fresh fruit and the scent of herbs. The birds returned to their songs, and the temples began to fill again with pilgrims and worshippers. Yet one place remained timeless, unchanging. A sanctuary where the body was cleansed, exposed, and celebrated as both necessity and ritual. The public bathhouse. Diodoros had heard tales of these places since childhood, stories of laughter, conversation, and contest mingling amidst steam and warm water. Today, at last, he was old enough to enter the baths in the company of his friends. It was a rite of passage as significant as his first public appearance in the Panathenaic procession or his studies in the Lyceon. Here, the naked body was neither spectacle nor philosophy, but plain reality. He arrived at the bathhouse just as the sun began to climb. The sky a soft blush of pink and gold. The stone building stood proud beside the Ilissos River, its rounded arches framing warm pools and steaming rooms beyond. The air outside was brisk, but as he stepped inside, the heat wrapped around him like a gentle cloak. The stone floor was warm beneath his bare feet, smooth but worn with age and countless footsteps. The scent of herbs, thyme, rosemary, and bay, mingled with the faint mineral tang of heated water, creating a comforting, almost sacred aroma. The sound of voices, splashing water, and soft laughter filled the air, like a gentle hum, a reminder that this place was alive with the spirit of community. Men already filled the large basin, a wide pool of clear water fed by heated springs. Some sat silently, others whispered or laughed softly. Their bodies were diverse, young and old, scarred and smooth, thin and thick. Each bore the marks of his own life, the calluses of labor, the bruises of training, the faint lines of age. Diodoros shed his cloak, sandals, and belt, stepping slowly toward the water. His skin prickled with the sudden exposure, but the warmth of the bath eased the momentary sting of vulnerability. "Come, Diodoros," called Iason, already immersed up to his chest in the water. "Do not waste time standing on ceremony." The two young men laughed and embraced briefly before slipping into the pool. Around them, the water rippled with movement, arms stretching, legs kicking, conversations floating just beneath the surface. The bathhouse was more than a place to wash. It was a social nexus, a crossroads of Athens' many classes and callings. Here, slaves scrubbed their masters' backs. Soldiers joked with philosophers. Athletes compared wounds and triumphs. There was no pretense in the baths, only the shared reality of flesh and breath and water. As they settled into the warmth, an older man approached, his silver hair slicked back, his broad chest gleaming with recent exercise. He was Menon, Diodoros's former gymnastic trainer, a figure of authority and wisdom. "Ah, young lion," Menon greeted with a smile, "the baths suit you well. Tell me, do you feel the freedom of the water as you did the freedom of the parade?" Diodoros considered. Yes, but here, the body is less performance, more truth. Good. The bathhouse strips away not only clothes, but pride and pretense. It is a place where a man sees himself and others as they truly are. They fell into easy conversation as the hours passed. Menon spoke of the importance of caring for the body, not merely as a vessel for strength, but as a temple for the soul. Athens teaches us to honor the body, he said, not for vanity, but because the body is the home of reason, courage, and virtue. We cannot excel in wisdom or justice if we neglect our physical selves. Nearby, a group of men discussed recent debates in the assembly, their gestures animated, but voices low. A young soldier told tales of skirmishes near Marathon, his chest heaving with pride. A sculptor described his latest work, a statue of Hermes, poised and nude, capturing both grace and cunning. Diodoros watched the interplay of light on skin, the way muscles shifted beneath water, the way laughter crept from one man to another like fire. There was no shame here, only acceptance. Later, he moved to the steaming sudatorium, a room filled with fragrant herbs and thick, hot air. The steam clung to his skin, opening pores and loosening muscles stiff from months of training. He closed his eyes, letting the heat melt away tension and thought. A voice broke his reverie. "Do you understand why we bathe together, Diodoros?" He opened his eyes to see Lysander, a fellow athlete and friend, leaning against the wall. His face was flushed from the heat, his eyes steady. "To cleanse the body?" Diodoros ventured. Lysander smiled. "Yes, but also to cleanse the spirit, to share in trust. Nudity here is not about display. It is about connection." Diodoros nodded slowly. He realized that the bathhouse was a microcosm of Athens itself, a place where the body was revealed in its most honest form, not for judgment, but for community. As the afternoon sun began to wane, the bathers dried themselves and dressed, their skin glowing with health and warmth. Diodoros felt a quiet gratitude. For the first time, he understood fully that the nakedness of Athens was not mere custom or spectacle. It was an expression of a deeper philosophy, that to be truly seen and to see others without disguise was to touch the essence of human dignity. Walking home along the riverbank, the water shimmering with reflected light, Diodoros carried that lesson close. The naked body was more than flesh. It was a vessel of truth, of trust, and of belonging. The first true breaths of spring unfurled across Athens like a slow awakening, stirring the city from its winter slumber. The scent of wild thyme and freshly tilled earth filled the air, mingling with the sweet perfume of blossoming oleanders along the narrow lanes. The sun lingered longer each day, casting golden shafts of light over the marbled rooftops and bathing the agora in a soft, inviting glow. Life spilled from every corner of the city, the calls of market vendors hawking figs and olives, the clatter of sandals on stone, the steady murmur of citizens debating philosophy or politics. With the warmer days, the people shed more than their heavy winter cloaks. They shed hesitation and restraint, stepping into the light, both literally and figuratively. It was a season of renewal, and nothing embodied this more than the daily rhythms of the gymnasium. Diodoros made his way through the bustling streets, the familiar smell of freshly cut olive branches mingling with the acrid tang of nearby workshops. The distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoed from a courtyard. Everywhere bodies moved, strong, supple and bare, gliding through the sunlit streets with the ease of those comfortable in their skin. Today, he was headed to the palestra, the heart of athletic training, where nakedness was a natural state and where the body was both instrument and expression of the soul. For many Athenians, the gymnasium was as sacred as the temples. Here one refined not only strength and speed, but also discipline, courage, and honor. The gates to the palestra stood open, and inside the sun-dappled courtyard was alive with activity. Young men wrestled and raced, their oiled skin shimmering under the clear sky. The sand beneath their feet was cool and soft, marked by footprints and the scuffs of struggle. Coaches paced the sidelines, calling out encouragement and critique in measured tones. Diodoros joined a circle of his peers, their bodies gleaming with sweat and oil, muscles taut with exertion. The air buzzed with a mixture of youthful energy and focused intensity. Here, every man was exposed, not just physically, but in spirit. Before they began their training, Menon, the seasoned trainer, gathered the group. His presence was imposing, his weathered face a map of years spent shaping bodies and minds. His eyes, however, were sharp and kind. "Remember, the art of the palestra is not brute force alone," he said. "It is grace, balance, and respect. To wrestle is to engage not only your opponent's body, but his will. To wrestle naked is to accept equality in all things. No armor, no hiding, just truth." The athletes nodded solemnly. Diodoros felt a surge of pride. Here, nakedness was not vulnerability, it was power. The exercises began in earnest. They sprinted across the yard, muscles coiling and releasing like springs. They grappled on the sand, testing strength and technique. They learned to fall without fear, to anticipate their opponent's moves, to yield when necessary. Between bouts, Diodoros caught his breath and looked around. Nakedness revealed differences. The curve of a shoulder, the scar from a healed wound, the variation of muscle and bone. Yet beneath these differences was a shared humanity, a unity. Here, status and wealth dissolved. The wealthy merchant and the farmer's son stood side by side, equal before the test of skill. This equality extended beyond the physical. The gymnasium was also a place of teaching, where elders passed wisdom to youth, where ethics were debated alongside technique. Nudity, in this sense, was both literal and symbolic. It stripped away artifice and pretense, revealing the character beneath. Later, as the sun climbed high and the sand grew warm beneath his feet, Diodoros rested beneath the shade of an olive tree. His body was slick with sweat, muscles pleasantly aching. The conversations around him drifted between the practical and the philosophical. One young rhetorician spoke loudly of the virtues of moderation and temperance, praising how the naked body was a symbol of balance between excess and restraint. A sculptor described his latest work, a statue of a nude youth, poised to leap into action, capturing the very essence of motion and life. Diodoros found himself drawn into these discussions, eager to share his growing understanding. Nudity, he said to his companions, is not merely a state of dress or undress. It is a statement. It says that we accept ourselves as we are, and that we honor the natural order. An older athlete nodded. It reminds us that beneath the clothes, beneath the titles and wealth, we are all mortal. It humbles us, but also strengthens us. The afternoon faded slowly into evening. The light softened, casting long shadows across the palestra. As the last exercises wound down, the athletes gathered to wash themselves, scraping oil and sweat from their bodies with curved strigils. They moved with practiced ease, the communal ritual reinforcing bonds of friendship and trust. Diodoros lingered, watching the water catch the final rays of sunlight, feeling a deep sense of belonging. But nakedness in Athens was not confined to the gymnasium. That evening, at a symposium held in a marble villa overlooking the city, Diodoros would encounter a different expression of this cultural ideal. The gathering was lively, a convergence of minds and voices. Poets recited verses celebrating the beauty of the human form. Philosophers debated the nature of virtue and the soul. Statesmen discussed the responsibilities of citizenship. In this room, the guests wore light tunics or cloaks, yet their discussions bore the same reverence for the body's truth. A famed poet rose to speak of the gods, sculpted eternally nude, not as objects of lust, but as ideals of perfection and harmony. To reveal the body is to reveal the soul, he said. The gods stand before us naked because they are unashamed of their nature. They embody the unity of strength and wisdom, beauty and courage. A philosopher countered, yet nudity is also a test, a stripping away of illusion. To be truly naked is to confront not only others, but oneself. It is to accept vulnerability without fear. The conversation deepened, weaving through art, politics, and religion. Guests shared stories of festivals where nudity was ritual, of painters who sought to capture the subtle interplay of light and flesh, of athletes whose naked struggles were echoes of heroic battles. Diodoros contributed from his experiences, describing the gymnasium's lessons and the bathhouse's communal trust. He spoke of nakedness as a language, one that spoke of honesty, equality, and respect. As the night wore on and wine passed freely, the discussions turned toward the future. Some feared that foreign customs and changing fashions might erode these traditions. Others argued for adaptation, embracing new ideas while holding fast to the core principles. Diodoros listened, absorbing the passionate voices, feeling the weight of inheritance and responsibility. When at last he stepped into the cool night air, the city stretched before him, a tapestry of light and shadow, sound and silence. The stars shone above, constant and eternal. Walking home beneath the olive trees, he reflected on the day's lessons. Nudity was far more than exposure of flesh. It was a commitment to truth, to community, to the pursuit of excellence. In Athens, to be naked was to be free. To be seen was to be known. And in that knowing lay the essence of civilization itself. The soft light of dawn seeped gently through the thick canopy of olive and plane trees that sheltered the grove of the Lycaon. Early morning birds sang their first songs, and the city beyond still lay quiet, wrapped in the calm promise of a new day. This grove, sacred to Apollo Lycaos, the god who revealed truth by light, was a sanctuary where Athens' philosophers, students, and seekers of knowledge gathered, stripped of all pretense and artifice. Diodoros moved through the shadowed paths barefoot, his skin cool against the soft earth. The early chill of spring still clung to the air, but already the promise of warmth was palpable. Here, in this natural amphitheater beneath the heavens, the body was laid bare, not as a mere physical state, but as a symbol of openness, humility, and the pursuit of wisdom. He saw others already assembled, young men and women, elders and novices alike, many unclothed, some draped in light hymations. Their bodies reflected the variety of human form, lean or muscular, weathered or smooth, scarred or flawless. Yet beneath these differences lay a shared reverence, a silent understanding that they were gathered not merely to think, but to become truly seen. Diodoros joined the circle, feeling the familiar mingling of vulnerability and strength that nudity imparted. There was no room here for artifice or deception. To be naked was to be honest, not only with others, but with oneself. The elder philosopher Theon, a man of measured presence and calm eyes, rose to speak. His voice was low but clear, carrying the weight of years spent, contemplating the nature of man and the universe. To seek wisdom, he began, is to strip away all illusions that cloud our perception. We must become as naked in mind as we are in body, shedding the robes of falsehood and pride to reveal our true selves. He gestured toward a nearby statue of Apollo, standing tall and radiant in gleaming white marble. The god's form was perfect, unclothed and serene, embodying the ideal harmony of beauty, strength, and intellect. See Apollo, Theon continued. He stands before us not only as the paragon of physical perfection, but as the embodiment of clarity and truth. Like him, we must expose ourselves to knowledge without fear, without hiding behind the garments of ignorance. A young student raised his hand, eyes bright with earnest curiosity. But teacher, does nudity not also expose us to shame and weakness? How do we reconcile the vulnerability of the body with the pride of the mind? Theon's eyes softened, and a gentle smile crossed his lips. Shame, he replied, is a veil we choose to wear or cast aside. It is not inherent to the body, but a product of fear and misunderstanding. When we learn to embrace our bodies as they are, flawed, mortal, beautiful, we transcend shame. We reclaim our humanity. He paused, letting the words sink in, then added, true courage is not in hiding our imperfections, but in showing them. In this, the body becomes a mirror for the soul. The group nodded, murmurs of assent rippling through the circle. The conversation deepened as they moved beyond physical nudity to explore the metaphorical stripping of the soul's defenses. They spoke of sophrosine, moderation and self-control, and how nakedness could be both literal and symbolic, a state of openness to truth and self-examination. They debated how societal customs of dress often served to conceal not only bodies, but motives, fears, and desires. Diodoros found himself captivated by the exchange. He reflected on his own journey, from the joyful nakedness of youth running through the olive groves, to the disciplined exposure in the palestra, to the communal vulnerability of the bathhouse, and now this, the naked mind laid bare, in philosophical pursuit. As the sun climbed higher, dappling light through the leaves, the discussion shifted to art and poetry. A visiting poet recited verses celebrating the human form, not as object of desire alone, but as the living expression of divine beauty and the mortal condition. Nudity, the poet declared, is the language of the gods made flesh. To reveal the body is to reveal the soul's song, the eternal dance of light and shadow upon skin. Others spoke of tragedy and comedy, where the body's exposure, whether literal or emotional, drove the narrative, compelling audiences to confront their own fears and hopes. After the formal discourse, the group broke into smaller clusters, walking the shaded paths or sitting by the small streams that trickled through the grove. Diodoros wandered alone for a time, the earth soft beneath his feet, the scent of wild thyme and jasmine filling his senses. He came upon a small shrine dedicated to Aphrodite, goddess of love, beauty, and desire. Unlike the statues of Apollo or Hermes, Aphrodite's figure was modestly draped, her expression serene and knowing. Yet there was an undeniable power in her presence, a reminder that beauty was not only physical, but also emotional and spiritual. Diodoros knelt and touched the cool marble, feeling a quiet connection. To live naked, he whispered, is to live without fear. To honor the body is to honor the soul. Rising, he continued his walk, pondering the complex dance of nakedness in Athenian life. It was not a simple matter of exposure or concealment. Rather, it was a dynamic dialogue between self and society, strength and vulnerability, modesty and courage. He thought of the men in the palestra wrestling not only for victory, but for honor. Of the bathhouse, where strangers bared their bodies and souls in trust. Of the symposium, where the mind was laid naked before friends. And here, in the Lyceon, where the quest for truth demanded the shedding of all masks. In all these places, nudity was more than a custom. It was a language of authenticity. As the day ripened, Diodoros felt a growing resolve. To embrace nakedness was to embrace life itself, with all its joys, pains, and mysteries. It was a commitment to truth, community, and self-knowledge. Leaving the grove, he walked back toward the city, the sun now high and warm on his skin. The streets of Athens buzzed with life. Vendors, philosophers, soldiers, children, all engaged in the daily dance of existence. Diodoros carried within him the lessons of the day, that to be truly naked was to be truly free, that the body was not a source of shame, but a vessel of honor, and that in exposing ourselves, we found connection, not only to others, but to the divine spark within. As the city thrummed around him, he vowed to live with this courage, to walk naked in body and spirit, a true citizen of Athens and the world. The relentless midday sun blazed high above Athens, casting crystalline light over the sprawling city, its rays glinting off the white marble pillars and sun-baked stones. The air shimmered with heat and anticipation, thick with the smells of roasted olives, warm bread, and the distant tang of sea salt, carried by the breeze from the Athenian harbor. Today was a day unlike any other, one that would draw citizens from all walks of life to the great theater of Dionysus, perched majestically on the southern slope of the Acropolis. Diodoros wove through the throng that thronged the narrow streets, feeling the rough stone steps beneath his bare feet and the soft caress of the warm air on his skin. His body, unburdened by heavy tunics or cloaks, absorbed the sun's energy directly, every pore alive with sensation. The city around him hummed with excitement. Vendors called out their wares, fresh figs, fragrant oils, painted pottery, while children darted in and out among adults, laughter ringing bright and clear. Philosophers and politicians debated heatedly at the agora, their voices mixing with the clatter of hooves and the cries of merchants. As Diodoros approached the theater's massive stone entrance, he felt a swell of reverence. The theater of Dionysus was a sacred place, a crucible where the mysteries of human nature were revealed and examined under the open sky. Unlike the closed confines of the gymnasium or the intimate trust of the bathhouse, the theater was a stage for the entire polis to witness life's dramas in their rawest form. Inside, the amphitheater stretched wide and steep, carved with skill from the living rock, its concentric rows of marble seats rising like the tears of a great shell. Thousands of citizens had gathered, their faces flushed with excitement and the glow of the sun. Most were clad lightly or nude, the summer heat encouraging freedom from restrictive garments. Here, nudity was not merely a practical concession, but a language itself, a form of honest communication transcending words. As the chorus entered, moving in measured, ritualized steps, their bodies revealed and unadorned, save for simple sashes and symbolic masks, their voices rose in an ancient, haunting melody. The choral song wrapped around the audience like a spell, its cadences evoking both reverence and forewarning. The chorus was a living bridge between mortal and divine, their naked forms embodiments of raw humanity, yet touched by the sacred. The actors soon followed, stepping onto the stage with a mixture of grace, strength, and vulnerability that drew the eyes and hearts of all. Their nakedness was startling in its honesty, their bodies not objects of mere spectacle, but integral to the unfolding drama. Each scar, sinew, and contour spoke as loudly as their words, communicating layers of meaning and emotion beyond the script. Diodoros watched, mesmerized, as the tragedy unfolded, a tale of gods who walked among men, of kings undone by hubris and passion, of mortals caught in the inexorable web of fate. The hero's naked form, straining with both physical and emotional torment, mirrored the turmoil within his soul. The goddess's bare figure radiated divine fury and compassion, her every gesture a powerful testament to her complex nature. The nudity on stage was a profound statement. It stripped away the artifice of rank, wealth, and convention, exposing the universal truths of suffering, courage, and longing that bound all beings. The actors' bodies were vessels of vulnerability and power, reflecting the delicate balance of mortal existence. Between scenes, the chorus intoned reflections on justice, mercy, the fleeting nature of glory, and the eternal struggle between human will and divine command. Their naked forms reminded the audience that beneath the robes of office or armor of soldier, every citizen shared the same fragile humanity. Diodoros found himself drawn into the emotional depths of the performance. He felt the hero's despair as keenly as his own, the goddess's wrath as a fierce wind within. The exposure of flesh and spirit created a communion between actor and spectator, dissolving barriers and fostering empathy. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the stage in hues of gold and crimson, the final act unfolded with tragic inevitability. The hero's fall was a tableau of surrender and acceptance. His body sprawled bare on the earth, a symbol of mortality and transcendence. The crowd was silent, breath held as the story reached its poignant conclusion. When the final word was spoken, a roar of applause erupted, thunderous and heartfelt. Diodoros stood with the others, moved beyond measure by the power of what he had witnessed. The theater had not merely entertained, it had revealed profound truths about the human condition through the naked, unvarnished body. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Diodoros lingered at the edge of the stage, fingertips tracing the rough stone worn smooth by countless feet. He contemplated the sacred nature of nakedness in the theater, not a vulgar display, but an act of profound courage and honesty. It was an offering of the self to the city, a ritual that bound performer and audience in shared vulnerability and understanding. Outside, the city pulsed with life. Market stalls closed, children played in fountains, and the smell of evening feasts drifted from open doorways. Diodoros paused at a quiet fountain, dipping his hands into the cool water and lifting it to his lips. The sensation was electric against his sun-warmed skin. He watched as a group of children played nearby, their laughter uninhibited, their movements free and natural. In their joyous abandon, Diodoros saw the purest expression of Athens' ideals, the innocence and truth of the naked spirit. Under the deepening twilight sky, stars began to emerge, twinkling like distant fires. Diodoros walked home slowly, his thoughts rich and swirling. He understood now that nakedness in Athens was far more than a mere physical state. It was a profound expression of identity and philosophy, a declaration of truth, trust, and communal belonging. To live naked in Athens was to live openly, without fear or shame, embracing both the frailty and the glory of the human form. It was to honor the body as a temple of the soul, a vessel of virtue and beauty. And within this nakedness lay the strength and spirit of the city itself, a beacon of light and courage in a world too often cloaked in fear and deceit. The morning sun rose slowly over Athens, spilling molten gold across the white marble rooftops and bathing the city in a gentle warmth. The air was fragrant, with the scent of blooming oleanders and freshly cut herbs, while the sound of distant temple bells mingled with the low murmur of awakening voices. For Diodoros, the city's early light was a summons to a place both familiar and sacred, the public baths. He walked barefoot through the cobbled streets, his skin still cool from the morning breeze, the warm sun coaxing it into life. The baths lay nestled near the heart of the city, a sanctuary of stone and water surrounded by towering cypress trees and fragrant jasmine. The marble facade bore the marks of centuries, its worn surfaces telling stories of countless Athenians who had sought cleansing not only of body but of spirit. As he approached the entrance, the sounds of water trickling over stone basins and the gentle laughter of bathers greeted him. Inside, the vast courtyard opened before him, paved in smooth marble and centered around pools of varying sizes and depths. Steam rose gently from the warm waters, mixing with the fresh morning air, creating an atmosphere both soothing and alive. Men of all ages moved gracefully through the baths, their bodies wet and glistening under the soft light. Some reclined on benches carved from the marble walls. Others waded or swam in the shallow pools, the naked forms of citizens, young athletes with taut muscles, weathered farmers with sun-kissed skin, elderly men whose faces told stories of wisdom and hardship, all mingled together without distinction. Diodoros felt a profound sense of belonging as he stepped into this world of openness and trust. Here, nudity was not a source of shame or embarrassment. It was a symbol of equality and shared humanity. The rich and poor, the powerful and humble, met as equals in the warm embrace of the water. He moved toward one of the larger pools, where a group of bathers practiced the ancient art of wrestling, their bodies sliding smoothly across one another, strength balanced by technique and respect. The air was filled with the soft sounds of exertion, breath-catching, feet splashing, voices encouraging. Nearby, attendants offered bowls of warm water scented with herbs, myrtle, lavender, and rose, used to wash away sweat and dirt. The ritual of cleansing was deliberate and communal. Oil was rubbed onto the skin, then scraped away with curved bronze strigils, removing grime and renewing the body's surface. This intimate process required trust and familiarity. To allow another to touch one's bare skin in such a manner was an expression of profound respect. Diodoros accepted the offered oil, feeling its smooth texture as he began to anoint his arms and shoulders. As the attendant scraped gently with the strigil, he felt a deep connection to the generations of Athenians who had performed this same rite, a ritual of renewal, not just physical, but spiritual. The bathhouse was more than a place of hygiene. It was a social forum. Conversations flowed freely here, unburdened by the hierarchies and formalities of the city's streets. Diodoros joined a circle of men discussing recent debates in the agora, their words punctuated by laughter and thoughtful silence. One elder, a retired general named Nicandros, spoke of the discipline required in both war and sport. The body is the foundation of the soul's courage, he said. To be naked before one another is to accept that foundation without pretense. It is honesty. A young scholar added, and it is also a lesson in humility. No armor, no cloak can hide the truth beneath. In this shared nakedness, we are reminded of our mortality and our need for one another. Diodorus found himself reflecting on how the bathhouse embodied the city's ideals of democracy and community. Here, stripped of status and artifice, Athenians met as equals. The naked body was the great equalizer, reminding all that beneath wealth or title lay the same fragile human form. Later, Diodorus engaged in a spirited discussion with Callista, a visiting philosopher renowned for her teachings on harmony between body and mind. Her presence was a rare reminder that wisdom was not confined to men alone. Why do so many cities fear nudity, yet Athens embraces it, she mused. Is it not because here, the body is honored as sacred, because we see in its exposure a metaphor for truth? Diodorus nodded, yes. Nakedness is a declaration of trust, an act of courage. It demands that we confront ourselves and others without masks. Callista smiled, her eyes shining. And in that confrontation, there is freedom, the freedom to be known and to know. Their dialogue meandered through themes of shame, vulnerability, and strength. They spoke of how nudity in Athens was entwined with the city's artistic, athletic, and philosophical traditions. The statues of gods and heroes stood unclothed not to provoke but to inspire, symbolizing ideals of beauty, virtue, and balance. As the afternoon light mellowed, Diodorus wandered to a quiet pool where a group of children played. Their laughter was unguarded, their movements natural and uninhibited. Watching them, he saw the purest embodiment of Athens' spirit, the innocence and joy of the naked soul. The bathhouse gradually emptied as the day wore on. Men dried themselves with soft linens and donned simple cloaks, preparing to return to the bustling streets. Diodorus remained a moment longer, savoring the lingering warmth of the water and the deep peace that pervaded the space. When he finally stepped back into the bright Athenian afternoon, he felt renewed, not only in body, but in spirit. The baths had reminded him that true strength lay not in concealment, but in openness, that courage was the willingness to be seen fully, without fear or shame. Walking through the city, Diodorus carried these lessons with him. Nakedness was not merely a physical state, but a living philosophy woven through the fabric of Athens, a city that dared to be known and to know, that honored the human form as a vessel of virtue and truth. And in that daring lay the enduring strength and beauty of his people. The first light of dawn spilled gently over the hills surrounding Olympia, turning the sky a pale rose and gold. The ancient olive groves whispered in the morning breeze, their silvery leaves shimmering softly as the city stirred to life. The sanctuary of Zeus, perched solemnly amid towering cypresses and fragrant herbs, stood as a beacon of tradition and divine power, a place where gods and mortals intersected through rites of competition, worship, and celebration of the human form. Diodorus walked barefoot along the worn stone pathways, feeling the cool earth beneath his feet. Around him, the city was already alive. Pilgrims from across the Hellenic world mingled with local artisans and farmers, their voices weaving into a rich tapestry of languages and dialects. The scent of freshly baked bread mingled with sweet honey cakes, and the sharp fragrance of crushed herbs carried on the warm air. Incense smoke curled upward from altars, blending with the gentle chorus of morning bird song. Olympia was not just a city, but a sacred theater for human excellence, where the naked body was celebrated as a vessel of divine favor and mortal virtue. For Diodorus, today's festival was the culmination of months of anticipation, a moment to witness the finest athletes stripped bare, both literally and metaphorically, their physical prowess on full display beneath the watchful eyes of the gods. Nudity here was not an indulgence or a simple concession to the heat. It was a profound, intentional act that expressed a unique Greek philosophy, one that saw the unclothed body as the purest form of human existence, a symbol of truth, courage, and unity. Approaching the stadion, Diodoros was enveloped by the growing crowd's energy. The great arena, carved from the earth and lined with gleaming marble seats, was nearly full. Naked men, young and old, gathered shoulder to shoulder, their bodies illuminated by the soft early sun. There was no distinction here of class or wealth. All stood equally revealed, their skin shining with olive oil applied to honor both gods and spectators alike. The athletes themselves were breathtaking, youthful and seasoned competitors, their muscles taut and defined through months of relentless training, moved with confident grace. Their bodies told stories of sacrifice and discipline, bodies that had weathered the rigors of the gymnasium, the rigor of diet and exercise, and the mental fortitude required to compete on this sacred stage. Diodorus's eyes traced the lines of their physiques, the chiseled contours of biceps and calves, the strong backs rippling with sinew, the taut abdominal muscles flexing as runners crouched in readiness. The gleam of oil on their skin caught the light, giving them an almost divine radiance. The herald's voice cut through the murmurs, calling for silence. The atmosphere grew taut with anticipation. The runners took their marks at the starting line, poised and steady, eyes fixed on the path ahead. At the signal, they exploded forward, a thunderous surge of muscle and breath, the pounding of bare feet against packed earth echoing like war drums. The crowd erupted, cheers swelling to a roaring tide. Young boys watched wide-eyed, elderly men nodded with pride, and women clapped in rhythmic applause. In this shared moment, the nakedness of body and spirit forged an unbreakable bond, a communion of souls celebrating the human capacity for strength and endurance. Diodorus felt his heart quicken as he watched the runner's muscles contract and release with perfect harmony. Every leap and stride was a hymn to physical excellence, a tribute to years of toil and devotion. The naked form, unencumbered by cloth, revealed every subtle twitch of effort, every bead of sweat, a testament to dedication. Between races, Diodoros wandered to the wrestling grounds. Here the contests were even more intimate and intense. Grapplers moved with fluid precision, their bare skin pressed together in a dance of power and strategy. The tactile closeness of their struggle, skin against skin, muscle against muscle, made their nakedness all the more charged with meaning. It was a language without words. Every hold, every twist, every breath conveyed honor, respect, and raw human will. The crowd watched in rapt silence as wrestlers grappled, their bodies gleaming with sweat, muscles flexing in perfect synchronization with their movements. To the Greeks, wrestling was more than a sport. It was a sacred ritual, a microcosm of life's battles between order and chaos, reason and passion. Nearby, young men practiced the pentathlon's disciplines: discus, javelin, long jump. Each movement precise, deliberate, embodying the Greek ideal of balance and harmony between strength, agility, and grace. Their naked bodies, lit by the warm sun, seemed almost sculptural against the backdrop of olive trees and distant mountains. Diodoros paused near the grand altar of Zeus. Priests moved solemnly about, preparing offerings of olive branches, honey cakes, and fragrant oils. The towering statue of Zeus loomed nearby, his marble form unclothed yet majestic, embodying both divine power and serene authority. Kneeling, Diodoros offered a silent prayer, feeling the presence of the gods in the sacred air. To stand naked before the gods, he whispered, is to embrace truth and courage, to offer oneself fully, without disguise or shame. Rising, he reflected on the profound vulnerability and strength inherent in such nakedness. It was a radical act of honesty, a public confession of one's physical and spiritual self. The city's embrace of nakedness was a statement of faith in human dignity and equality. In Olympia, nakedness erased barriers, creating a space where the body and soul were judged by their own merits, not by status or appearance. Diodorus's mind wandered to the great sculptors who had immortalized this ideal in stone and bronze, the statues of athletes and gods standing eternally unclothed, their perfected forms an homage to human excellence and divine inspiration. These statues were not mere art, they were philosophies carved in flesh and stone, teaching generations about balance, beauty, and virtue. As the day wore on, the final contests unfolded with breathtaking intensity. Victors emerged, their naked bodies shining with sweat and oil, crowned with olive wreaths, a symbol of honor granted by the gods themselves. They paraded proudly before the crowd, their nakedness a living testament to human potential and glory. The festival was more than competition. It was a collective act of worship and affirmation of humanity's place in the cosmos. Nakedness here was sacred, a language of trust, courage, and communal belonging. As twilight deepened and fires blazed across the sanctuary, Diodorus wandered through the olive groves, the moon casting silvery light over the ancient landscape. The stars above pulsed in rhythm with the beating hearts below, a celestial chorus echoing the sacred unity of gods and mortals. He understood now that nudity was not simply a cultural quirk or a necessity of climate. It was a profound expression of life itself, a celebration of the fragile, radiant human form forever connected to the divine. In this naked truth lay the enduring spirit of Greece, bold, radiant, and eternal. The early morning light spilled slowly over Athens, the city stirring from its slumber like a great living organism, waking to greet the day. The marble temples and public spaces, bathed in the soft glow of dawn, gleamed with an almost ethereal radiance. The familiar scents of olive trees, fresh bread baking in ovens, and the sharp tang of sea salt from the nearby port mingled in the air. It was a city alive with history and promise, a place where gods walked alongside men, not in visible forms, but through the ideals and rituals that defined daily life. Diodorus moved through the agora, the heart of Athens, with a contemplative gait. Around him, the city's citizens bustled about their morning routines, merchants setting up their stalls, philosophers gathering to discuss the nature of virtue and beauty, women weaving cloth, or preparing food for their families. Children darted through the crowd, their laughter bright and free, their bodies often unclothed, as was customary for the very young. The sight was a vivid reminder of the culture's deep-seated comfort with the naked human form, a practice that permeated every aspect of life. For Diodorus, the meaning of nudity had revealed itself to be far greater than mere exposure. It was a philosophy, a way of seeing and living that embraced the body as a vessel of the soul, a temple in which the divine could be glimpsed. The Greeks understood that to clothe the body was often to conceal the truth, to hide both its strengths and its imperfections. To stand naked was to accept oneself fully and to invite others to do the same. He thought back to the gymnasiums, where the youth of Athens gathered each day to train both their bodies and their minds. These open-air institutions were far more than places of physical exercise. They were crucibles of character, where boys and young men learned discipline, courage, and the ideals of Kalokagathia, the unity of the beautiful and the good. Clad only in the light sheen of oil and their own bare skin, the athletes embodied this ideal, their every movement a visible expression of their moral and physical striving. The absence of clothing in these spaces allowed for unrestricted motion and intimate observation. Coaches could study each flexing muscle, each subtle shift in posture, guiding their pupils to perfect technique and form. More than that, the nakedness fostered a unique communal bond, an equality of bodies where wealth and status dissolved beneath the universal truths of flesh and bone. Diodorus remembered vividly the sacred games held in Olympia and other pan-Hellenic festivals, where naked athletes competed not only for victory but for honor and divine favor. The sight of these bodies, oiled, sweat-slicked, taut with effort, was itself a kind of worship. The athlete's nakedness was an offering, a laying bare of self before gods and men alike, a testament to the human spirit's capacity for excellence. He also recalled the bathhouses, vibrant social hubs where men of all ages and classes mingled without barriers. The nakedness here was natural, a form of ritual cleansing that went beyond the physical. Conversations flowed as freely as the water. Bonds were forged in shared vulnerability and trust. The bathhouse was a democratic space where nakedness symbolized openness and respect, and where social distinctions faded beneath the shared humanity of the body. In the theaters, the naked form became an instrument of storytelling. Actors used minimal costume or none at all, allowing their bodies to convey passion, pain, triumph, and tragedy with an immediacy that clothing could never provide. The naked body was a living canvas on which the dramas of gods and mortals were enacted, inviting the audience into a profound encounter with the truths of existence. Diodorus's reflections turned to the philosophers, whose ideas permeated every corner of Athenian life. Socrates, who championed truth and self-knowledge, saw nakedness as a metaphor for the soul's exposure, stripped of illusions and defenses. Plato's visions of ideal forms included the human body, whose beauty and proportion mirrored cosmic harmony. Aristotle, in his emphasis on balance and virtue, underscored the inseparability of body and soul. Together, these thinkers provided a foundation that made nudity not just acceptable, but essential, a means to cultivate wisdom through bodily and spiritual alignment. As he walked through the agora, the market's pulse thrummed around him. Citizens went about their day in light garments suited for the Mediterranean climate, but the cultural acceptance of nakedness lingered in the air, a silent but powerful force. It was a culture of trust, trust in oneself, trust in others, and trust in the city's shared values. Children played uninhibited in the public squares, their bare bodies free of shame, embodying innocence and possibility. Their laughter and joy were a testament to a society that embraced nature rather than fearing it. Diodorus smiled, knowing that this openness nurtured not just physical freedom, but psychological and social health. His path eventually led him to the foot of the Acropolis, where the Parthenon stood majestic and eternal. The sculpted friezes and statues there, many depicting nude figures, told stories not only of gods and heroes, but of the city's soul, its highest aspirations toward harmony, balance, and the pursuit of excellence. The naked forms carved in marble embodied timeless ideals, linking mortal effort to divine perfection. As the sun began to sink, casting long shadows over the city, Diodorus climbed the Areopagus Hill. From this vantage point, Athens stretched before him, a mosaic of stone, life, and light. He breathed deeply the cool evening air, filled with the mingled scents of blooming jasmine and distant sea spray. In the stillness, he understood that nudity was the city's silent hymn, an enduring song of freedom, courage, and belonging. It was a gift to embrace vulnerability as strength to see and be seen without disguise, to honor the fragile beauty of life in its fullest expression. He thought of the countless statues and monuments that had immortalized this ideal, the perfect anatomy and poised stances frozen in stone. These were not simply art, they were philosophy made manifest, lessons for every citizen on the virtues of openness and balance. Diodorus's thoughts drifted to the personal stories behind those public ideals. The youths training in the gymnasiums, wrestling and racing with spirited competition. The elders who passed down wisdom and stories of gods and heroes. The mothers who raised children with acceptance and pride in their natural forms. In every moment, the culture's embrace of nakedness was a thread weaving together community and identity. He felt a surge of gratitude for living in a city that dared to see the human body as beautiful, sacred, and essential to the fullness of life. In the naked truth of Athens, he found a timeless wisdom, a lesson on the courage it takes to reveal oneself fully and the grace that comes from accepting others as they are. As the first stars began to shimmer in the deepening twilight, Diodorus descended the hill, his heart filled with a quiet resolve. He would carry these lessons forward, living openly, honestly, and with honor. For in the naked truth lay the enduring spirit of Greece, bold, radiant, and eternal.